President Trump has pivoted from his victory lap over the Attorney General's letter on the Mueller report to health care. Today he called the Affordable Care Act horrible and is mounting a push to kill it off, as Republicans attempted to do more than 60 times but couldn't back when the numbers were more favorable in the House. Sources tell Fox News the president went against two of his own cabinet members before igniting a legal fight over Obamacare. The Trump administration throwing its support behind a ruling that would abolish the law with no known replacement at the ready. That means millions and millions of Americans would lose their health coverage and major protections. The president says Republicans will come up with a better plan, one which no one has described. The Fox Business Network's Blake Berman reporting. He's live at the White House. Blake?
Shepard, we heard President Trump reiterate a line that he has now said for the past couple days here at the White House, which is that it is the Republican Party that is going to be, quote, the party of great health care. The president today continued to criticize the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, calling it a disaster, saying that the deductibles are rising at a rate that Americans just simply cannot afford their health insurance at this point. Now, the White House says the president does support covering pre-existing conditions and a plan put forth by Republican Senators Bill Cassidy and Lindsey Graham that would give states control of health care policies through block grants. But so far, the White House is also short on specifics on what a replacement package would look like, with the president simply saying today they're working on it.
So we're coming up with plans. We have a lawsuit right now going where phase one of the lawsuit terminates Obamacare, essentially terminates Obamacare. And if the Supreme Court rules that Obamacare is out, we will have a plan that's far better than Obamacare.
Now, sources tell Fox the new Attorney General Bill Barr and the Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar opposed this shift in policy to suddenly say that the entirety of Obamacare should be tossed. Those sources say at the end of the day, Shepard, it was the voice of the White House and specifically the voice of President Trump that won out, Shepard.
How are the Attorney General and his secretary responding?
We did reach out to both offices. Let's start out with the spokesperson for the Health and Human Services Secretary, Alex Azar, because they are flatly denying that he opposes the move from the Department of Justice. This was a statement from that spokesperson saying, quote, Secretary Azar fully supports the administration's litigation position in the ACA case, which bears his name. However, a spokesperson for the Department of Justice said they do not talk about internal deliberations and pointed back to an initial statement from Monday, which reads, quote, the Department of Justice has determined that the district court's comprehensive opinion came to the correct conclusion and will support it on appeal. There was also a report today that first came out from the website Axios that said the top Republican on Capitol Hill, specifically in the House, Kevin McCarthy, the congressman from California, told President Trump that he does not agree with this sudden reversal, with this new shift as it relates to wanting to completely toss out the Affordable Care Act. Shepard, we can tell you that McCarthy and the president did speak by phone when McCarthy was asked up on the Hill today by reporters about this. He did not specifically answer whether or not he told the president just that. Shepard.
Blake Berman at the White House. Thank you.
The new showdown over Obamacare after the Trump administration's decision to back a court ruling that would dismantle all of the Affordable Care Act. Now word, two key members of the Trump cabinet, Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar and Attorney General Bill Barr, opposed that move, and it is also not sitting well with some in the GOP.
I'm very disappointed and vehemently opposed to the administration seeking to invalidate the entire Affordable Care Act. The answer is for the administration to work with Congress and present a plan to replace and fix the law, not to, through the courts, seek to invalidate it altogether.
Joining me now is Peter Loge, Democratic strategist, and John Feary, a GOP strategist. Good to see you, John. It's been a while. My old neighbor down there in D.C.
Hi, Dana.
So Senator Ron Johnson, he was asked about this. Of course, he's a Republican from Wisconsin, and he said we shouldn't avoid this, and he's not going to let us. And I thought that was kind of interesting, John. You know, the president's saying if it's the #1 issue that people are worried about in the country, then we got to do something about it. Are the Republicans prepared to take this on and do a good job with it?
Well, apparently the president is, and he should be, because it's the #1 issue that drove the Republicans out of their majority in the House. That being said, Republicans don't really have a good alternative, which Susan Collins was mentioning. They need to get a good alternative. The number one thing that voters seem to care about outside of all the nonsense that comes from Washington was pre-existing conditions. The president did say in a meeting that he cares about pre-existing conditions, but if you invalidate the law, you better come up with a replacement that makes sense to a lot of people and actually fixes the problem, which is the high cost of health care. If you don't do that, then you're not doing anybody any favors.
Peter, I'll have you listen to Speaker Nancy Pelosi on this earlier today.
The GOP will never stop trying to destroy the affordable health care of America's families. The Department of Justice becomes the Department of Injustice when it wants to tear down health care benefits.
Peter, in this new Quinnipiac poll, it says that 55% of Americans want to improve the system and 32% want it replaced. I guess you could actually add those together and improve and replace it. But the Democrats, they're now in charge of the House. So what sort of legislation could we even be looking at here?
Well, you saw the House Act earlier this week. It's going to be interesting to see what the legislation is because, of course, whatever comes out of the House then has to go to the Senate and then get the president's approval. Whatever the debate is, though, I hope it's done based on facts and not fear. Let's not have a replay of the initial Affordable Care Act debate that was rooted in just a lot of nonsense that just wasn't true.
Well, we'll see how that goes. In the meantime, on the Senate side yesterday, we had a little debate, maybe perhaps premature, on the Green New Deal. I want you to listen to Senator Schumer and Senator Mike Lee on that yesterday.
For 5 years, he put no significant legislation on the floor about climate. For 5 years, we've had almost, when he's been in charge, no committee hearings on climate. For 5 years, we made no progress on climate. And then, when he tried his stunt, it boomeranged on him, and now everyone's talking about climate.
In my 8.5 years in the United States Senate, I've never seen anything introduced with such fanfare, talked about by the mainstream media as if it were the greatest legislative proposal ever, and then have people scurry when the lights actually turn on and they're asked whether to vote on it.
John, what do you think about all of this?
Well, first of all, I think the Green New Deal is a big political problem for the Democrats. That being said, I think what Mitch McConnell did was smart politics. I think it really kind of nailed it down for them. But the second point is, especially amongst younger voters, the environment is the #1 issue. So if you're like a John Shimkus in the House leading the climate change panel, you'd have to be more nuanced. You have to be pro-environment but anti-Green Deal. And I think that that's something that the Republicans have to understand, that the environment is a huge issue with younger voters. And if they want to break into that group, they got to do something about the environment.
Peter, what do you think about the initial rollout of the Green New Deal? I mean, there was a lot of fanfare. Part of that is because Senator Ed Markey, a veteran of the Senate, if he would have just done it on his own, probably not a lot of attention. You probably wouldn't have had that vote yesterday. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the new freshman Democrat, she gets a ton of attention. And she brings all of this scrutiny to it. And now you have a situation where the Democrats are saying, well, actually, we're not going to vote on it because it's not really fleshed out yet. We haven't had any meetings about it. We have to have all these committee assignments. Your thoughts about the rollout initially and how that might have affected things?
I think that one of the most important things to do in politics is to get on the agenda and to define the terms of the debate. The rollout put this front and center of the agenda, right? So at that point, we are now talking about climate change and seriously addressing climate change. The question isn't, do we pay attention? It's now, what do we do? And as we have that debate, I hope we do it in a way that recognizes, set science, that doesn't engage in scare tactics, but figures out a way that Democrats and Republicans can come together and honestly debate honest differences, but then also get something done.
Well, if we had you two out every day, we'd have honest debate and it'd be commonsensical, and we might get a lot more done. Peter Loge and John Fury, thanks for being here.
Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection is addressing, quote, unprecedented crisis at our southern border. CBP says they have more than 13,000 illegal immigrants in custody, more than doubling their crisis limit of 6,000 people. Joining me now, Congressman John Garamendi, who sits on the Armed Services Committee. Congressman, thank you for being with me.
Sure.
The president has declared it an emergency. This is a lot. There is now an estimated up to 1 million people by the end of the year that will have crossed our border illegally. Is this, in fact, an emergency? Your state is California.
Well, whether it's an emergency or not, the question is, what are we going to do about it? The proposal that has come from the president, frankly, doesn't make a whole lot of sense, particularly where he intends to get the money out of military construction programs that were deemed to be absolutely essential for the military and for the security of our nation. Let me just share with you an experience I had just 7 days ago. I was in Jordan. I was with the Jordanian military on the border between Jordan and Syria, a 300-plus mile, probably 340-mile border in which the United States has spent $340 million to build a 21st century border security, one that has all of the observation devices, the various towers located at key places, and rapid response mechanisms in place to
Okay, what's your
detain.
point?
The point is, it works. The most dangerous place in the world, a virtual border security
May I
works.
ask a blunt question?
Sure.
And I don't mean any insensitivity about this, but
Yeah.
are there as many people trying to get to Jordan for jobs and other things as there are people? And we're not just talking about Mexico. Look at all of those countries, all into Central America, sending unaccompanied children, unaccompanied minors to our border. I don't know if
Excellent.
Jordan is dealing with that. I'd be curious. It's just a question.
It's an excellent question because Jordan now has over 2 million displaced persons from Syria, and in Syria itself there's probably a few 100,000
Isn't that a different
Syrians that are
situation
trying to
because
get
of the
out.
war,
No.
though? I mean, can't they actually... I mean, it's asylum, it's refugees. I'm just trying to point out that it may not be apples and apples.
No, it's actually quite similar. In both cases, you're looking at people that are fleeing a dangerous situation. Now, you may or may not agree that the Central American countries are as dangerous as is
Oh, no, they
Syria.
are. Especially for drug traffickers and young women and men being sexually assaulted along the journey.
Well, and then we agree that we have a humanitarian crisis. The question is, how do we deal with that? Also, the UN, we also observed the UN High Commission on Refugees that is able to process using biometrics, eye scans, fingerprints, and complete history of the individuals so that the families are not separated.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. They can process 3,500 people a day, and if necessary, go as high as 5,000 people a day. So there are systems in place that we could use.
And maybe you can make some
technology.
suggestions. You started whether it's an emergency or not. It does matter because
Yes, it does.
in the House you said, no, it's not an emergency, and you pressed the president then into a veto. But let's move on.
Okay.
President Trump says the GOP will have a far better plan than Obamacare as the administration backs a court ruling that would dismantle the entire Affordable Care Act. I saw the pivot that in the House, via the House Speaker yesterday, made onto health care. Why are you focused on this particularly now, and what's the plan?
Well, the president has made an attempt in a court action that is in place in Texas and is active at this moment that would wipe out the Affordable Care Act. 20 million Americans would lose their insurance. All of the protections on pre-existing conditions would disappear, and the health care cost containment, such as it is, which is not all that great, would similarly disappear. And there is no GOP plan. Unfortunately, there isn't, and this is not new. For 8 years, the Republicans have said repeal and replace. Fact of the matter is there was really no replacement, and certainly the president has not put forth any replacement. It is a major, major policy issue, and yes, we are pivoting because, in fact, the scene has changed. The president has acted in a way that, frankly, is very, very detrimental.
Well, I meant
to
pivoting
Americans.
away from the focus on trying to get the Mueller report, which is where some in your party still want to be focused. Mercedes Schlapp with the communications team at the White House moments ago said the president's plan and his focus actually does include keeping pre-existing conditions. You guys will work it out on the Hill. I have to let you go.
Thanks,
Congressman,
Harris.
thank you.